And okay, before we start, or as we start, welcome everybody. Just want to thank our sponsors for this evening. This shiur is being sponsored in honor or in the observance of the upcoming Yortzeit and Shushan Purim, Meir Cronenberg, Meir ben Avraham, by his daughters Estella Berman, Sarah Avihar, and Lily Feder, good friends of Torah Motion. I see some of them here online, and we should have long life and good memories and good occasions to come and join all together. Thank you. And Bakasha, Marc, it's all yours.
Yes, thank you. And like I said, I was in Florida, and it's always good to go down there. My parents live there, but also I meet people who actually listened to the classes, not live, but so that was sometimes people even stop me. They recognize me, so that's weird. But so that's good to be back. It's March 18th, class number 2, the Mussar dispute. And before I get into it, I just there were some things that I wanted to get to last class. I was holding off. I didn't do it last class, but this is already from the previous semester. Just a few things I wanted to do from the previous semester. The other things, it's not really that important. I'll leave it. The first thing, the very last class, we were speaking about the minhag, the Kabbalistic minhag for children not to go to the funeral of parents, or actually I thought it was just of fathers. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I wasn't sure if it was daughters as well. And people said it is, and indeed it is. You can look in this volume. It's the memorial volume of Rabbi Yitzhak Nissi. There's like 6 separate books. And one of them, volume 6, is a whole book by his son, also Zichrono Livracha, Meir ben Ayahu, and it's all about the Isser Lietzias Habanim Acharei Mitas Avihem. So I wasn't sure whether Banim meant Banim and Banos. It does, but I'm pretty sure it only means fathers, because the whole idea is that the Zera that never became a child, that's they can go after you if you actually go to the cemetery. So a whole book this thick on that unusual practice. Okay, the second thing I want to share with you, I never got to it for some reason, and I think it's important to mention it, was with regard to repeating words in davening, because we've done so much on the Rav. And I did mention the Rav's position, but I didn't call attention to a letter he actually wrote in, it's written to Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld. I'm sort of, I don't know if I'm related, but my son-in-law's sister married a grandson of Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld last year. So I'm really not related, but okay, I can say I'm sort of related through marriage. But he was very, very close to the Rav, very close Talmud and follower of the Rav. And after the Rav passed away, he published a number of letters that he received from the Rav. Incidentally, he didn't publish one letter, which I have, which I got subsequently to writing my article and subsequently to the talks. One of the family members sent me another letter because of the shiur and the 23 talks, 21 classes we had on the Rav. He sent me a letter that doesn't appear there from the Rav about Mechitza. Very interesting formulation of the Rav about Mechitza, because he says there's no actual, you can't actually give an exact height. You have to actually see it to determine it. I'll publish that in a future blog post, I think. So I thank him for sending that to me. But in Hadarom is the rabbinic journal of the RCA, number 63 on page 27. The Rav answers Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld, who was also a pulpit rabbi's question about repeating words. Actually, the letter has 2 things. The first part deals with do you have to get married outside? Some people have this practice of marrying under the stars. And I seem to recall certain places where they would open the roof up. And he says that Reb Chaim didn't pay attention to this, and He thinks that he remembers that Rabbi Velvel's marriage was inside, not outside. And I haven't heard much recently about that, although I was at a Hasidic wedding a couple of years ago in Lakewood, and they actually went outside to do the chuppah. But other than that, I don't think I've been to weddings outside, but I think it's more because it's a beautiful setting and they like it. And um, I was at a wedding also. Rabbi Kelman was at a wedding also because of the rain. We had to move it indoors. They had to move it indoors. But in general, I don't know if people are makpid on that. So the Rav doesn't think it's a big deal. But then he asks, so what about repeating words? He says, Ani makpid ma'od. He says, the Rav, he says, I'm very stringent on it, that the Shliach Tzibor should not say any words in prayers twice or three times. He says, though, that this only applies in Chazaras Hashatz, repeating Shemona Esrei, and in Brachos of Shema, in Hallel, in Psukim of the Torah, of the Tanakh. I'm thinking that he says, even though these are not chova, these Psukim, you still can't do it. So that would apply to also in the end of Aleinu. V'neh, Mar, Vayashem, Melch, Bayomahu, Bayomahu. That's the Rav would have a problem with that. But he does say when it comes to piyuti and other matters that are not essential to the davening, and you're not quoting a pasuk, he doesn't have an issue with it. So that's relevant because in the Be'an Arachitz, before when you take the Torah out of the Aron Kodesh, Brich Shemei, I've been to shuls now where they don't let you do the way you used to do it. Remember we used to sing it, Be'an Arachitz, V'li Shmei Kadisha Kadisha Yakira. Now they make you, they stretch it out. They don't let you repeat any words there. And the Rav's saying, well, not a problem. After all, what could be the problem? It's from the Zohar. There's no Indian that you don't repeat words from the Zohar. Now, we saw that Rav Moshe wasn't so makpid on it, and the Aruch HaShulchan wasn't as makpid if you're not messing up, as we say, the matbeya of the tefillah. But the Rav is very strict. I recalled another example of this that. Because I want to read you something. Let me call your attention here to in davening. Anyone who's my age or older will remember this from Shabbos davening when we say in Musaf, what was it, after Tikkun Shabbos, we say Yismachud Machus. So growing up, you all heard this, and it's a Hasidic minhag. It's a Hasidic nigun. I don't know if the Hasidim still do it. One of our listeners could tell us. But we all grew up hearing this. Yismechu v'malachusecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbos, akore, oneg, Shabbos. Now, first of all, there's a repetition of Shabbos, shomrei, 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 Shabbos. Rav Moshe thinks technically it's not a problem in the Aruch HaShulchan, but there is a problem because then you say v'kore, oneg, Shabbos, and that's not the order. The word Shabbos, as you see, does not appear at the end of, doesn't come after oneg. Doesn't say Kari Oneg Shabbos. That's what the Chazan added in. So that, according to Rav Moshe, would be absolutely not allowed. But that's what we all say. Okay, so why do I mention this? Because today, sometimes the people, they'll say it like Yismechu v'malchusecha Shomrei dai 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 Shabbos, or Shomrei Shabbos dai 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 Kari Oneg dai dai dai, something like that. So, and you're not repeating words, so therefore it's okay. Well, I'm telling you, who says it's okay to do that? Look at you heard of the Chavos Yair? Rav Yair Chaim Bachrach? The great Chavos Yair, 17th century. The Sefer Chavos, that's named after his, although it's a pasuk, but it's named after his mother, Chava. If you look in he wrote a commentary on Shulchan Aruch. It was only published 2 generations ago. It's called Makor Chayim. And if you look in Orach Chaim, I printed out here, Simon Sadi Zion, it's page 41, Machon Yerushalayim printed it. He says that there's a terrible minhag that has come to Germany. You know where it came from? It came from Poland. All the bad minhagim come from Poland, he says. And what do? he talks about as the Chazanim, they do all sorts of bad things. But the one that I'm calling your attention to is that he says as follows. He says when they're davening, apparently they were mocked. They didn't want to repeat words. So he says that first of all, they mess up the tenuot and etc. Then he says, while they're the chazan, what does he says? He says the korin dan dan la la v'chayotze. So in other words, the Chavas Yair is saying you can't say yismechu v'malchusacha dai 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 dai. He says that's also wrong because then you're just putting in filler, and therefore, so for the Chavas Yair, no la la, no dai dai. If it doesn't work for the nigun, if it doesn't work, in other words, if you want to use the old nigun, but you don't want to repeat the words for the Chavas Yair, find a new nigun, because it's just he makes it seem as if it's just as bad to repeat words as it is to throw in all that filler, die 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 die, because that's also not part of the davening. He says that he says it's terrible what these chazanim are trying to do. And finally, I want to, not that it's relevant per se with any particular class, but it's relevant to many classes we've done. We've spoken a lot about Jewish law, and we've spoken about Blue Greenberg's famous saying, where there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way, which I have made an addendum to it. When there's a rabbinic will, there's sometimes a halachic way, and we're going to see an example of this. I believe it's incorrect to say there's always a halachic way. That doesn't work. But so there's an article here in the last Hamayan, which is Teves Tufshin Pei Daled by Rav Shlomo Dichovsky. His name is Rav Shlomo Dichovsky. They added Rafal because he was ill. He's one of the great dayanim. He was on the Beis Din HaGadol. You can't get bigger than the Beis Din HaGadol. That's the supreme rabbinic court. The official name is Beis Din HaGadol Irurim, the appeals court, because the high court in Jerusalem is an appeals court. But all the greatest rabbanim are on that court. Rav Avadia Yosef, Rav Yashiv was on it. That's like the top of the top. Then he became like head of the Beis Din. Now he's retired. So he has an article in here called Hir Harim Hilchotiyim Be'ikvot Milchamot Yisrael. Just thoughts about, with the halachic thoughts that arose out of the wars of Israel. And he goes into all different tangents. But on page 69, he tells the following story. And I know, because I've heard people say that what I'm going to tell you now is conservative Judaism. It's not halachic, it's all this. And here you see one of the Gedolei Ador, Rav Dichovsky, he says it. So it's not me saying it, it's not Rabbi Kelman saying it, it's not anyone else, it's he saying it, but this is reality. And anyone who knows about Psak and has spoken to Poskim, this is real. He tells the following story. It's from his Sefer. He wrote a Sefer, Kfiva de Shelos and Shuvos, Leiv Shomea. And he repeats what he wrote there in the introduction to one of the volumes. He quotes a story from Dr. Chana Katan. Chana Katan is married to Yoel Katan, who's the editor of this Hamayan. She's a gynecologist. She's American, actually. She's written a lot on maternity halachot. And Rav Yoel Katan is at Shalvim. I don't think he's in yeshiva. I think he's in the high school there. Big Talmid Chacham from the family. Katan is Klein. His father, Moshe Klein, is the one who did the dictionary of Loaze Rashi. That is all the Rashis that he cites Old French, because the family comes from France, originally from Germany, but through France. And he tells the following story that Dr. Katan told, that she was a young doctor, and she was doing her thing, helping women give birth. And one of the Gedolim, he doesn't mention the name, one of the poskim in Jerusalem, must be from the Eda Charidit, he poskined that you couldn't use an epidural. It's usher. I don't know. I'd like to know what the reason is that he poskined that. What? Because the curse of Eve? Well, if that's the case, then we can't use tractors on our farms, because, the men also have a curse. They can't bring forth their fruit, as it were. It's the same thing. The woman brings forth her fruit with pain, and the man has to bring forth the crops with pain. But whatever, this posek offered the epidural. And so lo and behold, the daughter of this posek was one of Dr. Katan's patients. And she was having terrible pains. And Dr. Katan suggested that she should do like everyone does, have an epidural. And she refused, saying that Abba Shalom, her father does not permit. But when the pain was getting much worse, Dr. Katan suggested to call and ask your father again. Maybe he can find a way to matter it. Maybe yesh makom lahatir. And so they brought the telephone to her, and she called her father and spoke to him in Yiddish. That's why I say it's one of the Eda Haredit rabbis. And he listened on the phone to his suffering daughter. Dr. Katan said she didn't understand what was being said. She doesn't know Yiddish, but she did hear that the daughter was crying, Tata, Tata, Daddy, help me here. And when the conversation ended, Dr. Katan asked her, what did your father paskin? And she said, mutter, mutter. Now, Rav Dichovsky says as follows: from here we learn, kikasher ponim el tata, that when you turn to tata, daddy, the very familiar here, not formal, not some stranger, but when a child turns to daddy with a problem, az lifamim gam pesikat halakhah mishtaneh, so that sometimes even the psak halakhah will change. So here you see one of the Gedolei poskim saying that depending on who asks, if it was a stranger asking this posek, the psak would have been no epidural. It's his daughter, and he hears her, the subjective element enters, and that's the theme of the article, that subjectivity, how it enters into the halachic process. So we already saw the Rav last semester, where he says that he's conscious of the subjectivity. And the Rav didn't say this, but at other times he could have said that he'll try to keep it at bay as much as he can. But in the case we saw, he didn't. He said that I'm going to try to matter. I want the Jews to, rabbis to be chaplains in the armed forces. So here you see one of the Gedolei poskim saying, the whole article talking about how subjective factors can influence the halakhah. In this case, it was his daughter saying, Tata, you got to find me a heter here. This is hurting me. And so I think that's very interesting. And what can I say? There are certain writers in halakhah who portray halakhah as simply like a science. It goes in a computer and comes out, when it's an art. And let's leave it at that. And now we go back, we take you back to Eastern Europe, to this issue, the Mussar dispute, which we're going to be focused on for so many weeks. Last class, we spoke a little bit about the really before the Mussar dispute, some of the issues there. I mentioned in an offhand way that Mendel Leffin, the Maskil, he wrote a work which became very popular among the Mussarniks. And I thought I said that it was an adaptation of Benjamin Franklin. If someone wrote to me that it's not a translation, but I said translation is mistaken. It's an adaptation of something Benjamin Franklin wrote. In fact, there's a whole article here by Nancy Simkoff, who's a scholar of East European Jewry. Benjamin Franklin in Jewish Eastern Europe, Cultural Appropriation in the Age of Enlightenment. And she talks about, how Mendel Leffin used Benjamin Franklin's work to come up with a good Mussar work. Okay, I want to now, though, pick up where we left off. If you remember the last thing we were dealing with, I gave you some examples how even with Rav Yisrael Salanter, they made troubles for him. They opposed him because they didn't like this idea of Mussar he was spreading. We have to get into more detail today. What could they possibly not like? I have to tell you one more thing about Rav Yisrael Salanter, because generally Rav Yisrael Salanter was treated very well because he was known as a great tzaddik. The real issues, the real controversy, and when it gets really problematic, is after Rav Yisrael's death. But there is one other example that Katz mentions in Pulmos Mussar, that in 1849, Rav Yisrael Salanter comes to Kovno, and the Rav at that time. His name was Rav Leibel Shapiro, no relation to me. He's known as one of the great Gaonim, Rav Leibel Shapiro. Wow. He's known he's known for a number of things, but one thing he's famous for is there's a book called Total Sir Kovno, and it mentions this that there is a practice. We all have this minhag. We stand up for Aseres Adibros. We stand up. It's one of the things you stand up for. This has been going on for over 1,000 years. We stand up. Lo and behold, in 1934, they published the response of the Rambam, where the Rambam says you're not supposed to stand up for it. This is often described as the Rambam saying, because we can't say that one section of the Torah is more important than another. But that's not what the Rambam says if you look to it. There are definitely sections of the Torah that are more important. The Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad is more important than knowing who Esav's concubine was. What the Rambam says, importance has to do with philosophical truth. What the Rambam, theological truth, what the Rambam says is that no section of the Torah is more sacred, holy than another section. Sanctity has to do with revelation. Every part of the Torah, even the concubines of Esav, have the same holiness because they come from the same divine source. That's what the Rambam says. But no one knew about this for all these years, and basically no one knew about it, and no one listened to it. And when the Rambam's tshuva first came out, they asked Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe has a tshuva on it. He says, no, that's not our minhag. Everyone stood up for it. Rav Avad Yosef, however, a big follower of Rav Moshe, he, for whatever reason, decided that he has to make a stand on this, and he spoke about it, and he wrote about it, his response saying it's absolutely forbidden. And because of his influence, it then became popular that, in the Rambam's day, you sat down. You would sit, I guess, for everything. But they're not going to have you sit because everyone knows you stand. So today, in many shows, they actually make an announcement. Not every show, but many shows, you should stand up from the beginning of the Aliyah. And I ask people sometimes, why you make an announcement stand at the beginning of the Aliyah? That's not Minhag Yisrael. Minhag Yisrael everywhere. Ashkenazic and Sephardic world is only stand up for the Aseres Adibros, not to stand from the beginning of the Aliyah. In fact, if you stand from the beginning of the Aliyah, you're defeating the whole purpose of the Minhag, because then you're not standing for Aseres Adibros. You're standing for the whole Aliyah. That defeats the whole purpose. There's no reason to do it. But they always tell me, well, because you're not supposed to stand for the Aliyah. So I say, we're not supposed to stand. And either they don't know, or somebody say, the Rambam says. Okay, the Rambam says. Yes, the Rambam says, but it's not Minhag Yisrael. Not everything the Rambam says we follow. And if you really want to follow the Rambam, then why would you stand from the beginning? Because they're standing dafka for the Aseres Adibros. So in any event, although this year I was at a shul and they didn't announce from the beginning of the Aliyah. Everyone just did like everyone did for 1,000 years or more. Right before Aseres Adibros, the guy gives the clap, and then we all stand up. Okay. However, Rav Leibel Shapiro, as far as I know, he's the only person in history to ever come up with this on his own. He, on his own, in Kovno, in the mid-19th century, abolished the practice of standing for Aseres Adibros. That's what's recorded in the Sefer Total Sir Kovno, which I assume means you sit. Not that you stand for the beginning of the Aliyah, you sit, because Dafka, you're not supposed to show that any. Look, if you always sit for Kriyas Torah and then you happen to stand up for the entire Aliyah of Aseres Adibros, you also are violating the Rambam, because then you're saying that the whole Aliyah, not just Aseres Adibros, this whole Aliyah is more sacred or of more importance than everything else. So the whole thing doesn't make sense, but you can't fight City Hall. What are you going to do? You can't, if once these minhags start taking off, you can't stop it. Not even 10 years ago, I think, the new minhag started. You'll see it this Shabbos to stand up for Parsha Zachar. Never heard of such a minhag. All of a sudden now everyone's standing up. What are you going to do? You're going to go back? It's and in almost all your shows, they're going to make you read the whole pasuk, unless you're Chabad. Chabad, you just read Zecher. But that's my bar mitzvah parsha, and I've read Parsha Zachar, even not a bar mitzvah, so I know. I was taught, you say, Timcha es Zecher Amalek, es Zecher Amalek. No whole pasuk. Now they're telling you have to repeat the whole pasuk. You can't change it. This has now become basically the minhag. So all sorts of interesting minhagim that just are developed. So this Rav Leibel Shapiro. It's recorded that he sent someone out to when Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would give his drashas to challenge him, to dispute with him. And again, that's just an example, an early example that even in Rabbi Yisrael's lifetime, they knew that Rabbi Yisrael was a tzaddik, but they didn't want him to be They didn't want him to be undisputed. They didn't want people to look at him like he's the Tzaddik Hador or the Gadol Hador. And therefore, if you send someone out to oppose him, if he in his Talmudic discussion, someone asks shilas on him and kashas on him, people will look at him. They won't think that he's unquestioned, and therefore, if it's a dispute between Yisrael and another rabbi, he won't be one of the special ones that they can just listen to whatever he says, because Rav Leibel Shapiro didn't like what Yisrael was preaching. But if you want to really see the beginnings of the Mussar dispute, by which I mean rabbis attacking Mussar in a widespread fashion, which then splits the Torah world, by which I mean the intellectual Torah world, then we have to look after Rav Yisrael's death and really to the 1890s. Rav Yisrael died earlier than that. In fact, I was going to give you dates, but I can look it up, or rather just give you a date. Yeah, 1883. I was going to say 1881. So good thing I looked. Rav Yisrael died 1883. So what am I talking about? Well, we have to look to Slutzk. Slutzk is one of the great Torah cities in Lithuania. Last week, someone said Rav Haron Kotler, Rosh Yeshiva of Slutzk, and I went along with it. And then someone pointed out correctly, he wasn't. He was never called that. He was called the Kletzker. Rav Haron Kotler did come and work at the yeshiva, but it was always known as his father-in-law's yeshiva, Zalman Meltzer. When the yeshiva moved, because of the Soviets, the communists, to Kletzk, then he was known as the Kletzker. But this is before his time, because there was a great rabbi in Slutzk. His name was Rav Yaakov David Wolofsky. We know him as the Ridbaz, Reish Yud, not Radbaz, as it's often mistakenly written. That's Rav David and Zimra from Egypt, probably the last of the Rishonim. We're talking about the Ridbaz. I think let me show you a picture of him while we're speaking here. I might show you a picture of the great Ridbaz. We've had classes on the Ridbaz. His father's name was Zev. So Yaakov ben David Zev. Here, let me show you his picture face. Here you go. I pulled up Wikipedia. So he was a great Talmud Chacham, the Ridbaz. We know him in particular for his chuvos and for his commentary on your Jerusalem Talmud. He comes to America. He ends up in Chicago for 2 years. The introduction to his Sefer, written, his chuvos deal with the issues in America. Fascinating, wonderful, wonderful Chidushei Torah, one of the Gedolei Hador. But I have to say, with no disrespect intended, controversy followed him wherever he went. And in fact, they say the story is, I don't know if it's true, but the story is because of his conflict with the Shalch team in Chicago, they actually locked him in the freezer. And he could have died. And the story is that he told his family, we have to leave on Shabbos. They went on the train. I don't know if that's true, but he had lots of controversies. Everywhere he went, he had controversies. When he came to the land of Israel, he was told by the Rabbonim of Jerusalem that not to stay here in Jerusalem, but go to Tzfat. Why would anyone go to Tzfat? Who is in Tzfat? You go to Jerusalem if you're an old Rav. But they knew that wherever he went, trouble followed, so they sent him to Tzfat. That's the story that's recorded. He became Rav in Slutzk. Now, whether he's responsible for the controversy here, I don't know. But sometimes these Rabbonim, they're very they are very adamant about their way, and Hashem Shemayim, but it could create trouble. So he became Rav in Slutzk, and while he was there, he asks the Alter of Slobodka, Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel. He wants to open a yeshiva, and he asks Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who's the Rosh Yeshiva of Slobodka. Slobodka is the great Mussar yeshiva that was founded by Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, student of the students of Rishon Salanter, a yeshiva devoted to Mussar, where not only will you study Talmud, but you'll also work on yourself from a moral perspective, on your Yirat Shamayim. This isn't something that just comes naturally. There's something that you need to work on. A new position was created at the Mussar yeshiva called the mashgiach. We have a mashgiach to make sure that the food is kosher. This mashgiach has to make sure your soul is kosher. And this is a completely new, and so a whole new approach, which we'll get into more detail as we go along. In Mussar, the Rav Yisrael's perspectives brought to bear in a yeshiva, the great Slobodka yeshiva. So the Ridbaz asks him to asks the altar of Slobodka. Doesn't speak Finkel is known as the altar, the Saba. Today in Hebrew they call it the Saba, but in the old country it was called the altar of Slobodka in 1896 to send him not just students but a ram. That is, someone to run the yeshiva. And Rav Zalman Meltzer, who at this time was teaching in Slobodka, he agreed to go become the Ram, like the head man, and 14 students. 14 students come with the great Rav Zalman Meltzer to Slutzk, to this new yeshiva. The 14 students became known as the Yad HaChazaka. Yad HaChazaka, Yad, Yodalad, 14. Just like the Mishnah Torah. The Rambam never named the Mishnah Torah Yad HaChazaka. People didn't like the fact that the Rambam called his great halachic work like the second Torah, the repetition of the Torah, Mishnah Torah. So instead, they changed it to the Yad HaChazaka, which often we refer to it in shorthand as the Yad. But if you want to be a Maimonidean, if you really are a lover of the Rambam, don't call it the Yad, call it the Mishnah Torah. That's the name the Rambam gave it. The Yad HaChazaka was named to take away, not to use that name. But these 14 were known as the Yad HaChazaka. I want to read you the name of these 14 who came to Slutzk, and they're the ones who created all the problems. I mean, the Mussar dispute begins in Slutzk because of the Yad HaChazaka who come. Now, how do we know who these 14 were? We know who these 14 were because of a very interesting book, Sefer. Here it is. Oleh Shem. Written, came out in Pinsk in 1912. The author's name is Shmuel Gottlieb. Look how thick it is. It's divided by country, every single country. He wrote to every rabbi in the world, and he must have had all sorts of people signed up for the book ahead of time to pay for all this postage, asking them to write back to him with their biographies. And some of them wrote back with very short notices, when I'm born, where I learned, where I'm rabbi of. Others wrote back with a whole page, their biography, where they learned, who they married, what their Sfarim are. So you get all sorts of interesting information about the Rabbanim. The American Rabbanim, the whole section on America here as well. That's how I know who gave Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg smicha. So a fascinating book here. By the way, for those of us who are Sephardim or those who use Sephardic pronunciation, I have to tell you how this book should be pronounced. And it's not pronounced, no one pronounces it this way in transliteration, but you listen to a Baal Koreh, a Sephardic Baal Koreh, this word underneath the Aleph, it's a Kamatz Gadol. So, and underneath the Hey is a Kamatz Katan. It's actually, it's a Chataf Kamatz Katan. So it's actually pronounced, because it's an Aleph, it's Ah. The Kamatz, Sephardim pronounce it Ah. So it's Ahole. It's not Ohole. Ashkenazi, we pronounce basically Kamatz Gadol, Kamatz Katan, similar, or something like that. But Sephardim have to pronounce this Ahole. And I went online today to see, well, is that really what the Sephardim do? And I listened to one of the big Balei Kriya from Jerusalem, Sephardic Balei Kriya, and indeed, that's how he pronounces it. Ahole. Ahole. So any of you, by the way, who adopt Sephardic pronunciation, that is, you say ah for kamatz, and you say tu, not su for tough, and you don't have a suf, then you're then that's how you should pronounce it. Although I'll give one caveat, because if you're an Israeli, we have a lot of Israelis listening to us, you speak modern Hebrew, or you're Sephardi, your Seirei and your Segel are the same. So there's no zecher repeating it, because basically they're all the same. There's only one. There's a zecher. It's Bet Sefer. There's no sefer. But if you're in America, even if you, maybe if you went to Flatbush, it's different. But all the people I know who have the Sephardic pronunciation, like my sons, they still pronounce Seirei like an Ashkenazi differently. But you can't say Ohole. It's Ahole. Because for everyone who does that, the comments in the pocket. Okay, let me read you from the Oleh Shem Under the entry of Slutzk, page, he divides it into different sections. Each one has a different page. It begins who the rabbi is and tells the whole history of it. So here are the Talmidim, the halakhah. Some of them became great, great Torah scholars. One, Eliezer Yehuda Finkel. If you're in the yeshiva world, you don't call him Eliezer Yehuda Finkel. You call him Lezer Yehuda. He's Lezer Yehuda Finkel. We've spoken a good deal about him because in the classes on the Meir Yeshiva going to Shanghai. But Lezer Yehuda Finkel, that's the son of the Alter. Two, Rav Baruch Rabinovich doesn't become famous. This is not the Baruch Rabinovich from Munkach, a different day from Tavrik. Three, Yitzchak Ziv, also from Tavrik, doesn't. They all became Rabbani, but never didn't become famous. The next is four, Yitzchak Rubinstein. He became the official rabbi, the crown rabbi of Vilna. There are two rabbis in Vilna, and he was the crown rabbi. Then he was elected actually the actual rabbi. And this was thought to be a great disgrace to Rav Chaim Ozer Grzinski, that the Mizrahi, when you're not supposed to have a Rav in Vilna. Since the Vilna Gaon, you're not supposed to have, since the Vilna Gaon's time, you're not supposed to be a Rav in Vilna, but they decided to have a Rav. And what happened was during World War I, Rav Chaim Ozer, he was the greatest Torah scholar, but he left, and Rabbi Rubinstein remained, and he did much. He was a big Talmid Chacham, as you could see, but he wasn't Rav Chaim Ozer's level. He's a big Talmid Chacham, but he did a lot for the people, and he was there for them, and therefore they wanted to reward them. When the idea came up, I don't know who came up with the idea first, if it was the semi-religious or the Mizrahi, to have a rabbi. The people wanted Rabbi Rubinstein. They had respect for Chaim Ozer, but they wanted Rabbi Rubinstein as their Rav. Safes Chaim saw this as a great Chilul Hashem, the Marcheshes, Rav Chinuch Eigis, who was Mizrahi. He was on Rav Chaim Ozer's base, and he resigned from Mizrahi over this because Mizrahi supported Rubinstein, who was a Mizrahi leader. So that's the politics of the rabbinate, but he was the official rabbi there. He escapes during the war, and he makes himself way to New York, where for a short time he actually teaches at Yeshivas Rebitzel Chanan. So that's Rav Yitzchak Rubinstein. He's 4. 5 is Rav Yosef Konvitz. Rav Yosef Konvitz becomes a leader of Agudas Rabbanim in America, the Rav of Newark, but he also becomes the son-in-law of the Ridbaz, and he's going to have a role in our story as well, as the son-in-law and as a Mussar personality himself. Rav Yosef Konvitz, he wrote Shelos and Shuvos as well. Then 6 is Rav Litman Rutskin. Don't know anything about him. The 7th, his name is Lev Pochinsky. He was not famous, but he had a son, Rav Eliezer Pochinsky, who's a big Talmid Chacham in Yerushalayim, close to the Chazon Ish. The 8th is Rav Moshe Wachtfogel, not the household name. 9th is Rav Moshe Hechtman, not a household name. 10th is Rav Pesach Pruskin. He's better known. In fact, Rav Moshe Feinstein studied under him. Rav Moshe Feinstein was in yeshiva for a little bit, and he was in Rav Pesach Pruskin. Number 11, Rafal Halevi Lobach. I don't know who he was. And 12th is Rav Reuven Katz, the famous Degel Reuven at Petach Tikva. We've had classes on him. The 13th, his name is Shlomo Henich of Dvinsk, not important, well-known figure. And the last is someone named Mendel Luntz, who had already passed away by the time this was written. So these were the 14th. Okay, so here you have the Ridbaz bringing in 14 students with allegiance to the Mussar yeshiva of Slobodka, adherents of Mussar, and he creates his own yeshiva. Well, this creates a controversy. And for the first time in 1896, we have a Rav, a well-known Rav, coming out publicly. The very first article that ever appears in print against the Mussar movements comes out of Slutzk and is a direct response to what I just described. Now, not surprisingly, this rabbi, and he's remembered for being the one to launch the first cannonball. And he broke the ice, as it were, and people keep coming back to him because then he's attacked and he's defended. Well, who is this other? Well, there was another rabbi in Slutzk at the time, and I think we have to understand this whole controversy, the beginnings of it, in the context of this dispute. There was a rabbi. I always pronounce the name Feimer, Feimer, Feimer. Although Nosson Kamenetsky transliterates it as Peimer. Maybe it is Peimer, but I'm not sure. The best way to, one of the son of this rabbi we're speaking about actually ended up coming to America and died in Brooklyn. So I guess I tried to look online under Peimer and I couldn't find anything. I guess then you'd figure out how it is. But this rabbi, his name was Rav Meir, let's call him Feimer, Rav Meir Feimer. And he is a great opponent of the Ridbaz. There was a terrible dispute in Slutzk between the Ridbaz and Rav Meir Feimer. In fact, I have unpublished information, unpublished documents from the Feimer side in this controversy. I'm a little afraid to publish it because on the one hand, it's very eye-opening because it shows you what they were saying and what they were thinking. On the other hand, if I would publish this, here I'm publishing stuff attacking one of the Gedol Yisrael. I have to find a way to publish this because I do want to write about this battle between them. Rav Meir Feimer. So where do they get to? How are there two rabbis in the city? You're supposed to only have one rabbi in a city. What's going on? Well, Rav Meir Feimer is the son of Rav Yosef Feimer. Yosef Feimer was the Rav in Slutzk for 35 years. One of the Gedol Yisrael. His tshuvos have been published or republished by Machon Yerushalayim, recognized Gadol. He was succeeded by a name that many of you know. When Rav Yosef Feimer dies, the thinking was that his son will take over. That's how they did it in Eastern Europe. There was a lot of this nepotism, that the son takes over. In fact, the rabbis often said that the son has a right to this position by Yerusha. Now, you'd understand why the rabbis would say it. No one bothered asking the people. Your Ramosha has a tshuva that says it doesn't apply anymore today. Because when you hire people, you hire them for a limited time. There's no assumption that the son's going to take over. We don't have, but we have some dynasties in America as well. But that was common in Europe. But Rabbi Feimer, for whatever reason, when Rav Yosef died, his son, Meir Feimer, didn't want the position. He was at the time serving as a Rav in another city called Berezin, and whatever. He didn't want to come back there. So you know who becomes the Rav? The Beis Halevi, Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, the namesake of the Rav. This is the famous Beis Halevi, the father of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, Rav Chaim Brisker. So you're talking about the great rabbinic dynasty. He becomes Rav in Slutzk. Now, the Beis Halevi, he wasn't he was rough there, and then there were problems in Slutzk with the Balabatim. As was always the case. He goes to Warsaw. He's in Warsaw for I think it's 4 years, and then a new position opens up for the Beis Halevi in Brisk. Brest-Litovsk, the Rav of Brisk, his name was Rav Shulei Diskin. He goes on Aliyah. So Beis Halevi becomes Rav in Brisk, and so begins the Brisker dynasty. Okay, so Rav Meir comes back. Rav Meir Feimer comes back to Slutzk after the Beis Halevi leaves. The story is that the Beis Halevi said Rav Meir Feimer should be the Rav. He didn't want to be it, so the Beis Halevi came. When the Beis Halevi leaves, Rav Meir Feimer comes and succeeds his father. And then mysteriously, after not that long, Rav Meir Feimer announces that I'm resigning. I'm resigning from Slutzk. I'm going to become a businessman. Pretty unheard of to have a position, nice position like that, to resign, although the Beis Halevi resigned. So, I mean, it happens, but he resigns. Why did he resign? We have two different versions of the story. One version is that his daughter became irreligious. This is an era when many people became irreligious in Lithuania, many of the young, not just Lithuania, in Poland as well. But I do have to say, I'm going to write about this because I don't know how many of you listen to David Westenstein's show. I'm in the car a lot. I listen to it. Some of them I listen to. They're interesting. But he has said on numerous occasions, including last week, he says, and I emailed him and I said, it's not true, but he continues saying it. I guess it's one of the pieces of information he has in his mind, and it keeps coming out. He's saying that 95% of Lithuania were fry. That's the word he uses, fry, irreligious. 95% were Machal Shabbos. It's not true. I'll grant you that the Hasidim were better at keeping the people maybe than the Fox. That although there's plenty of people who have to fold in the Hasidic world also, but 95%, no, that's not true. And the best look, we have statistics. How do we have statistics? Because we know the Orthodox parties. That's the best way you can decide these things. Is look at the various elections. We assume that Machal Shabbos are not voting for Agudas Yisrael, that sort of thing. Even if maybe you have from some nostalgia, but on the other hand, we know that the people who are religious who would vote for general parties. So the idea that 95% of Lithuania were irreligious, it's not true. But there were plenty of people who became irreligious. Was it 50%, 60? We have to figure out how we can come to estimates. So there's been some deal in Poland also. People have written on this, how to figure out exactly. Gershon Bacon and others calculations. Gershon Bacon thinks that up until World War I, the majority of Polish Jewry was Shomer Shabbos. Now, because you can't look at a city. Cities, you have the villages remain traditional much longer. I heard from Rav Golevsky, who was the Rav of, who was the grandson of Rav Simcha Zelig Rieger, the Dayan of Brisk. And he grew up in Brisk. He said that in his youth there was only one store that was Machal Shabbos but for Hesia. That doesn't mean everyone was so medactic on mitzvos, but only one guy was willing to do it publicly. And so in the smaller towns, people kept the tradition much longer. Okay, so the story is that Meir Feimer thought. This is what Rav Yitzhak Nissenbaum, the great preacher, Mizrahi preacher, writes in one of his books, that Rav Feimer thought that if he could not be the Rav of Slutzk when one of his own children was irreligious, how could he preach to the community when in his own house, look what happened. So he thought there was only two choices. Either he'd have to kick his daughter out of the house or he'd have to resign. And he resigned. That in and of itself, Nosson Kamenetsky in his book Making a Gadol, he mentions this. He says that's an example of a Mussar person, even though he's an anti-Mussar person, that he's not turning his back on his daughter. He resigns rather than having to kick his daughter out of the house. This was an issue in those days, but there were many. I don't know if it's true. The story, it's an interesting story he tells because there's plenty of Rabbanim whose children were irreligious. Although the truth is, they probably kicked their kids out of the house. It's only in the last generation that you find now in the most Haredi world, because every house, basically, or every other house, you have someone who's irreligious, that they have a much more open attitude. There was a time when they wouldn't have this. So much so that I've shown you in previous classes, they went to Rav Edelstein and they asked him questions there. What to do if a boy comes home, he wants to come over Shabbos with his girlfriend? So Rav Edelstein says, fine, fine. What about putting him in the same room? He says, fine, fine. It's not your problem. So here you have, it's amazing. In a Haredi world in Bnei Brak, the irreligious son is going to come over with his girlfriend and you're going to give them the bedroom together. And if you would have said 30 years ago, 20 years ago, that the leader of the Haredi world would give that as advice, that, you can't lose the ties, you have to keep them close, people would think you're crazy. So now we have in the most frum world, we have people with children who are intermarried. So, they still come visit. It's a different world, but this is 130 years ago. And that's one version of the story. And even if it's not true, the fact that Rabbi Nissenbaum records it shows that it was a possibility, it was an issue. And I have to say that most of the children of Rabbani who became irreligious, they did not remain at home, at least based on what I have been able to determine, because what would they want to live at home? How can they be who they are living in the house of the rabbi? So by mutual agreement, I guess they would leave. Rav Kook has a letter to someone about this, to a rabbi, Milstein was his name, about this very issue, what to do about his children who are irreligious. There's another version of the story that Meir Feimer resigned because the community was corrupt and financially, and the leadership, and he couldn't deal with that. Be that as it may, he leaves the Rabbonos, and in Slutzk, he becomes Rav in a couple of cities, and then he returns to Slutzk. He returns to Slutzk in 1895 as a layperson, a balabas, a business person. It was not long before he has his own following. Lots of people in the town, they liked him. They knew about his father. They remember him, and he begins to have a following. And they see him as the real Rav of the community, not the Ridbaz. In fact, his son, who's also named Yosef, sets himself up. He's set him up as a Rav in a shul, and he starts his own yeshiva. So here you have the official Rav of the community, the Ridbaz, and then you have Meir Feimer as the unofficial Rav for a part of the community. The Maskilim, by the way, all went to Meir Feimer, and his son has his own yeshiva. Rav Henkin, the great Rav Yosef Eli Henkin, was in Slutzk at this time at the Ridbaz's yeshiva. The Ridbaz yeshiva, Rav Meltzer's yeshiva. The Ridbaz was the rabbi, but Rav Meltzer was running it. In fact, Rav Henkin got smicha from the Ridbaz, one of his smichas. He says, though, that the Ridbaz never tested him. His son-in-law, Rav Yosef Konvitz, tested him, and then the Ridbaz wrote the smicha. But Rav Henkin says that the reason the students went to the new yeshiva from Rav Yosef Feimer is because Rav Meltzer's yeshiva was very strict, no secular studies. They were not even allowed to read the newspaper. And this is a oppressive environment, I think many people think. So they went to this new yeshiva, which didn't last that long. The Ridbaz was a kanai. So it's understandable. He was an extremist. It's understandable that many people would not be comfortable with that sort of Rav. The Ridbaz famously said, if you hear an English language sermon, get up and walk out. Only Yiddish. I've said before, I have a friend who leaves during sermons, and if people ask him why, he says, because I hold like the Ridbaz. If it's not in Yiddish, I don't want to hear it. Obviously, this is then going to create a controversy. You have two rabbis in the community, and the Ridbaz is one who's a kanai. This is going to be a problem, obviously. In fact, according to Nissenbaum, the people asked Meir Feimer to return to Slutzk precisely because they were not happy with the Ridbaz. Now, when I say that Ridbaz was a kanai, I don't mean it, this isn't my judgment. The Ridbaz himself writes as follows in the introduction to Ashelos and Shubas. Listen to what he writes. You can find it on page 10 in the new edition of the Beis Ridbaz. Posher sort of a quote. V'ani me'odi hayisi b'tivi kanai gadol. The Ridbaz tells us that he's saying, I am a kanai, I've always been a kanai. Who says being a kanai is a negative thing? The Chazon Ish writes about how kanaos is a positive trait. It all depends who's the kanai. It's been suggested that the reason for bringing in the Yad HaChazaka, the Mussar students, to the yeshiva in Slutzk was actually to strengthen the Ridbaz's position. Here you have they come in 1897, they brought in. 1895, Rav Yosef Feimer comes, creates controversy. You bring in a yeshiva to better establish his position. Now, Rav Nosson Kamenetsky doesn't like this, doesn't agree with this. And he says in Making of a Gadol, I have a PDF if anyone wants. We're going to return to Making of a Gadol a number of times. I have Making of a Gadol, the original, and I have the new improved edition, which is the new worse edition because it was a censored edition. It's the unfortunate thing, and I told this to Rav Nosson Kamenetsky. I wrote an article here 2 years ago in the Jewish Review of Books. They asked me to write it, Making of a Gadol, a 20-year retrospective. So you can read my original article on Making of a Gadol, which I wrote when it came out in 2003, I think it was. Yeah. My article was 2003, I believe. It came out 2002, or you can read 2022, my retrospective. I told Rav Nosson Kamenetsky he made a mistake. He doesn't identify all the people in this picture in the pages. This incidentally is the altar of Slobodka, if you can see. And but he doesn't show you this is Rav Aaron Cutler, looking very dapper as a young bacher. But he wouldn't he didn't want to identify in some of these pictures. In any event, why does there nothing like this? Oh, I see it's right 925. So what I need to do still is tell you what's going to tell you where Nosson Kamenetsky says why he doesn't agree with that. As the reason this is also, I said, we're not just doing the dispute. You're going to learn all about all these Gedolim. And then we're going to see Meir Feimer's attack. What does Meir, how does he launch this attack on the Mussar movement? The crazy stuff he says, and then really we're going to be on a roll, because for every attack on the Mussar movement, you're going to have defense on the Mussar movement, and what begins in Slutzk then spreads all throughout Eastern Europe, and then it enters the sacred walls of the yeshiva itself, even the sacred walls of the Slobodka yeshiva, the Mussar yeshiva, the Altar's yeshiva. This the conflict is going to enter everywhere, and I think what our challenge is going to be is, because we deal with Gedolei Yisrael here, to try to at least appreciate what the great fear was and why these Gedolim and so many of the Gedolim had a problem with Mussar. And along the way, we're going to learn all sorts of history. In fact, next class, I'll even introduce you to Gwyneth Paltrow and what her family's role is in this whole saga. Or actually not in the saga, just so happens that one of her family members, her sefer, is printed together with someone who has a central role in this saga. But time is already late, so let me make a note here on my notes where we left off. I hope you're ready to be brought back into, sometimes I think I was born in the wrong century. I should have been late 19th century Lithuania, because that's what most of my day is spent in. But okay, let's see the questions and comments. Mel says that many wedding halls have a skylight over the chuppah. Yeah, I've heard that, but I can't remember ever being in a wedding where they opened up the skylight. And people are mocked not weddings in a show. I've been to weddings where they do it outside, but other than one in Lakewood, I don't know if people do it outside for any reason.
Mark, I'm pretty sure even at the bait in Toronto, the big show in Toronto, there's a skylight in the hall. Paul was shaking his head. You can get married outside in the shul, which is normal, and in the hall of the shul, which has a skylight. And I've been to plenty of weddings at the Bay where people get married in the hall because they want that skylight. I think it's more common than you think, people insisting on outside weddings. But anyways, okay, I'm sorry.
I don't know. Does anyone know the reason for it? I know the reason why not married in shul.
Under the stars, it's you're getting married under the stars. It's a bracha like by Avraham Avinu, Zaraka. Yes, I think there's the idea of bracha. It's kind of, there's also a minhag. I don't think anybody follows this anymore. To get married only in the first half of the month as the moon is growing, like until
there was minhagim of days to get married, but now it's hard enough to get a hall sometimes.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
The Rav says Rabbi Kelman says the Rav also had a problem with the congregation singing with the chaz and the chazaras hashatz. That is, all the singing we do in Yom Kippur Piyutim was not allowed in his minyan. In Germany, you would not sing along with the chazan, and the choir wouldn't even sing in kedusha. There are certain times when you take the Torah to the ark, the choir sings and the people can sing, but not during kedusha. But for piyutim in Shmona Esrei, that was never an issue for them. I don't know what would be the problem singing along with the chazan.
You can't sing that because
why does the Rav have an issue with that?
Because the chazan has to do the chazar shuts only the chazan, and trei kole lo mishtai, two voices can't. So the Rav is very makbid. I know from people who tell him, I would hate it.
Yeah, but you got to, maybe you could say that if people sing low, but then some people are.
I was never there, but this is what I hear from a lot of people. The Rev, anybody ever playing in the Rev's minyan?
We spoke last class. Most people would say, "What's the difference?" Where no one's being yotzei with it anyway, all that. But as we saw last semester, the Rav holds that chazaras hashatz is actually a kima mitzvah.
Correct. It's filat hatzibur. It's filat hatzibur.
Yeah. So there's some. Okay, it's interesting. And Nikki says, until today, the Chevra Kadisha, the Belgian community, will not allow women at any burial, and even the mother's burial. Okay, that's of interest. Ben, from Israel wrote me, because we also spoke about women speaking, that today it's very common in religious Zionist circles for women to speak, including in some somewhat Hardali places. Um, yes, so Moshe points out Rafal Shapiro of Volozhin. So his father is of Rav Leibel of Kovno, but that's again no relation to me. And Rafal Shapiro is the father-in-law of Rav Chaim Brisker. And it says in Moshe, you say that in the Toldos yeah, I gave the wrong name of it. Toldos Yehudim Bekovno, he sat for Kriyas HaTorah. He sat for all Kriyas HaTorah. You're saying, yeah. Well, in Lithuania, as far as I know, they sat for Kriyas HaTorah, but I heard from someone who was in Slobodka. When I was young, I had a Slobodka person in my shul. He told me that they would stand for Kriyas HaTorah. I don't have the book handy to look at. And you say that the Shlo in Shavuos writes to stand by the Merkava in Yecheskel on Shavuos. Oh, that I didn't know. We also stand for Az Yashir. I would consider the Ridbaz, I think, the last of the Rishonim, not first to the Achronim. He's before the Achronim. The Achronim really starts at post Shulchan Aruch. Maybe the Shulchan Aruch is maybe the Achron, or Shulchan Aruch is the middle. I think the Ridbaz, we have to consider him the last of the Rishonim. Now, this is, I think, could be relevant to halakhah, because if you're one of these people who adopts the position of halakhah basrai, if the Ridbaz is in the Rishonim, then maybe he could trump another Rishon. But I think we have to distinguish. There's the late Rishonim and the early Rishonim. The Ridbaz is not a Rishon like Rashi or the Rambam. He's a Rishon maybe like the Tashbetz is a Rishon, the later Rishonim. That's my point. Mel says, in my minion, we stand for the whole Aliyah of Aseres Libros and the Shira and Chazak, because it's disruptive and noisy when people stand in the middle of the Aliyah. I don't know what you mean when you say you stand for, I mean, you stand for the whole Aliyah of Chazak. Okay, this I've never seen before, but I'd be curious now how long they've been standing for the whole Aliyah, because I wonder of Aseres Libros, if my sense from being around places is that they started standing for the beginning because of the Rambam's position, even though, like I said, it was universal. As far as I know, it was universal just to stand for standing for the Aliyah, standing for Chazak. Okay, well, that's that I've never heard of, but it makes sense. I want to tell you something about, since you mentioned that. Hold on a second, because we just did Chazak. Yes, okay, and I got it. Okay, I'm going to show you something now, which again will never take off. No one's ever going to follow this. I'm going to pull it up on my screen here for you, but I'll pull it up in a second. Hold on, Shmuel Bays. But you can impress people next time. I just thought of this because of what Mel said. Oh, you can't see the screen here. Let me show you my screen. Okay. So hold on a second. I gotta find it here. I know it's in this. Yes. Okay. You see everyone here? What does the pasuk say in Shmuel? Chazak v'nis chazak ba'adamenu. So you see from this that we shouldn't be saying chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. You should be saying chazak, chazak, v'nis chazak. That in biblical Hebrew, it's nitz chazek. So what are you going to do? You can't change it. You're never going to change it. But if you want the proof that really it's supposed to be pronounced nitz chazak, not nitz chazek, now why is it? I don't know. We have these exceptions sometimes. You'd expect it to be a seri, it's a patach back and forth, but here you see explicitly, you can't get any better than this, that it should be chazak, chazak, v'nis chazak. But you'll have as much luck with that as you will in Yedid Nefesh by saying Tisalam instead of Tisalem, even though you can look there, it's a clear rhyme. It has to be Tisalam. But as I said, there's no pausal in modern Hebrew. There's no such thing as a pausal. So it's Tisalem, even though none of the sitters say, they all get that right. So there it is. Thank you, Mel. Moshe says controversy followed his son over by convicts. That's a different controversy. There was another Rav in Newark named Rabbi Mendelssohn. He was the Rebbe, by the way, of Rabbi Gedalia Dov Schwartz. And he was also a Rav in Newark. And the conflict between Rabbi Mendelssohn and Rabbi Convitz, but isn't that our Masorah? What did Yeshai Leibovitz say? Yeshai Leibovitz said that we know Chazal had a sense of humor because they say, Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom olam. Scholars create peace in the world. And when we look around, we see that on the contrary, lots of rabbis usually creates machokas. So, but both of them, Rabbi Konvitz, and I know them both, and I love them both because I'm writing my book I'm trying to write it. Too many other things taking up my time, but my book on halakhah history of America, and each one of them, you want to know how they dealt with Shabbos violation during this era between World War One and World War II. They were leading poskim. They wrote Shelos and Shuvos, so you get a real sense of the community by reading their writings. But that was the dispute that we're going to talk about was at least ostensibly an ideological dispute. The dispute between Rabbi Mendelssohn and Rabbi Konvitz was a typical rabbinic dispute. It was the same. It was just it was in localized the same dispute between Agudas Harabonim and other. There was two other rabbinic organizations. There was Degel Harabonim, and there was another rabbinic organization. Not all the rabbis got along, just like they don't get along today. And those were two really gedolim, great poskim, and they didn't get along, just like lots of rabbis didn't join Agudas Rabboni. But that's a different issue. Yes, Paul, you are correct. The Ridbaz was an ancestor of
Miriam, not Esther. Her name was Miriam.
It was the Ridbaz was the father-in-law. It wasn't the Ridbaz, but the grandfather-in-law, I think, of Rav Cheskel Abramsky, right? I believe was the Ridbaz. I'm confused now. I have to check it, but definitely Abramsky becomes Rav in Slutzk. They're definitely related. Ridbaz has a number of descendants.
Her name was Miriam, not Esther.
What is it? It's the grand. Am I wrong here? Is it? I can't look it up now. Is the Ridbaz the grandfather-in-law of Rabbi Abramsky? Is that correct? I believe so. I'll check it for next class. Someone privately asked me, I said, Baruch Rabinovich, I don't know who he is, that the son of Yitzhak Chana? No, the son of Yitzhak Chana is Tzvi Rabinowitz. He is going to play a central role in our story also, not surprisingly, as an anti-Mussar person. And then I'll explain to you, how is it that the son of Yitzhak Chana Spector happens to be named Tzvi Rabinowitz? Whatever happened to Spector? And privately, someone points out, Ray Paczynski, yes, was the son-in-law of the Alter Slobodka. Yes, the Alter Slobodka had many children. Go on Wikipedia, look at the entry. You'll see all of the. He has children, he has sons, and he has daughters who married big Rabbani. He has one son who they don't talk about, although Kamenetsky speaks about it. He became irreligious. He came to America, did his thing. Mel says in the Simonim Tikkun, a Kamatz Katan is printed differently than a Kamatz Gadol. Indeed, and if you look every time that word tense OLA is mentioned, you will see that the under the hay it's the Kamatz Katan. And Moshe says he thinks Moshe Wachtfogel was Rav Nosson Wachtfogel, Lakewood's father. Could be, and you say it's Feimer, not Feimer. That's what I always thought, Moshe. I see you know a lot about Lithuanian rabbinic history, so I thank you for agreeing with me because Nosson Kamenetsky, who knew, I think it's fair to say, knew more. At least he knew more than me. I don't know if he knew more than you, but he certainly knew more than me. He said Feimer. And now Nosson Wachtfogel from Lakewood, who also was from Yeshivas Rebitzel Chanan. So we also have someone here who knows a lot about, tells me that Rafal of Lubech was Rafal Alter Shmulevitz, son-in-law of the Alter Navardik and father of Chaim Shmulevitz. I did not know that. So thank you very much. Yaakov Sasson says that most Faradim sat during the reading of the Ten Commandments based on the Ari, even prior to Ravad Yosef's campaign. That is news to me, Yaakov, because I never heard the Ari say that, and Rav Avadia doesn't quote the Ari as saying that. So I think we need to investigate this because Rav Avadia does not quote the Ari, as far as I recall, in his Chuvin Yechavadas as saying that. So someone says that he recalls me saying Reb Chaim was the only gadol who all the kids remained observant. I don't know if he's the only gadol, but he stands out. If you look at Rav Soloveitch's contemporaries, it's impossible really to find someone whose all the siblings remained religious. Reb Chaim had 5 children, and they all remained religious, which is quite okay. A few more questions, comments. So Moshe says it's interesting to note the Ridbaz, who brought in the Mussar students, was against the methodology of Chaim Brisker, who was also against Mussar. Yes. Although I have to say that, look, I've spoken a good deal about the Ridbaz and the Briskers. I can now reveal something I didn't reveal before. I told the story. I didn't tell you who told it to me. Here's the story which I told. One of the students of Soloveitchik cites the Ridbaz, and the Rav tells him, of Soloveitchik, don't mention him. And the student mentions him again, and the Rav goes crazy, screaming, as the Rav was wont to do in the 50s. And the Rav screams, some Gedolim are always right. Some Gedolim are sometimes right, and some Gedolim are never right. The Ridbaz was never right. I heard this from an eyewitness, Rav Zvulun Harel. I didn't want to mention who told it to me because he might have not wanted me to repeat it. In fact, he actually told me not to repeat it, so maybe I shouldn't have. But I told him, I think I might have said to him that I told it without mentioning by name. He's the one who told it to me. And the Briskers always assumed that the comments of the Ridbaz in the introduction against the chemistry was directed, and I believe it is directed against the Briskers. It's not directed against Rav Reines. He mentions this new method in Lita, but he also mentions the new method in Zamot. Zamot is an area of Lithuania, and this area of Lithuania, Zamot, includes tells. He doesn't only attack the people in Lithuania, the Rosh Hashiva with chemistry. He says it's better to have no Rosh Hashiva than to have such a Rosh Hashiva. He also attacks the chemists in Zamot. Zamot is tells. Zamot is Rosh Shka. So I think we need to be clear that when the Ridbaz attacks the methodology, the new Lumdus, the Lumdus that the Beis HaLevi said, I was born before Matan Torah, because now you have new giving of the Torah. I think we have to conclude that the Ridbaz is not just attacking the Briskers, he's attacking Rav Shimon Shkop, who had his own method, which created controversy. Okay, I think I could go on. We're having lots of fun here, I see, and many comments. I don't want to go much. I'm going to, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to copy all these comments here, and I'm going to send them to myself, and I'll get back to some of them
Rabbi Shapiro,
next class maybe, but we've I don't want to keep people too much long. That's a final comment. Someone's talking.
Minhag Frankfurt today is Hazak v'nis Chazak.
So who says that?
Naftali.
Naftali, yeah, but you're saying in Washington Heights they say Nis Chazak?
In Bnei Brak, in all the yes. Rabbi Hamburger, Rabbi Hamburger brings it down in the.
Oh, I didn't know that. But when you say Bnei Brak, you don't mean a Litvish yeshiva. You
mean
the
shul, the Ashkenaz shul Bnei Brak, the Ashkenaz shul that's in.
Okay, that's Ashkenaz. So the old German minhag. So I thank you for reporting that the old German minhag remains of Nis Chazak. I assume that there was a time when everyone said Nis Chazak. How about Yaakov Sasson? And what do the Sfardim do? They say, but you know what? We've all been influenced by modern Hebrew. But the Germans hold on to them and hugging like almost no one else, them and the Yemenites. But thank you for pointing that out. And I'll pick up with some of these comments that I don't want to keep us too long, though. Thank you all. I hope you're having fun. I hope. Look, for some people, we're going too much in the weeds, and we're picking up and landing in the middle of Lita, the center of Torah Judaism. But for those who like this sort of thing, we're going to have lots of fun. So I appreciate it, and I see we already have a lot of learned people here, some whose names I even mentioned. So shkoyach to you all, and God willing, see you next week. Rabbi Kelman, take it away.
Thank you very much. Okay, you could go on a few more minutes. I wouldn't object, but okay, I get it.
Okay, whatever. I stopped. I'm going to begin with some of these comments.
Yeah, of course.
I'll begin with the comments. I copied them all to myself.
Yeah. Okay. We look forward to our regular schedule throughout the remainder of the week, and of course, next Sunday we won't have our regular shiurim because of Purim, but Shushan Purim. Well, Monday night will be Shushan Purim. That 8:30 will stop be after night, but that we'll see you next week, of course, the after Purim. Okay, everybody, be well. B'sorot Tova, thank you again for sponsoring in memory of your father, Lily, and Estella and Sarah. Thank you, and we should have good occasions to celebrate. Okay, everybody, be well. Lila Tov, and we look forward to learning with you soon. And invite a friend to join us. Lila Tov. Okay, thank you.